I didn't hear the word at first. I felt it, a small recoil in the body of the town, like the hush before a gull dives. It moved through the market square and along the stone quay, slipped between stacked creels and the silver clink of fishmongers, and landed softly at my back. Monster. I kept walking, one hand under the swell of my belly, the other caught in the strap of my shopping basket, while the morning wind loaded itself with salt and the tang of diesel. The tide breathed against the pilings, a long exhale. It was June in Kilbracken, the highlands far enough north that the days felt elastic, and still the sea found ways to surprise us. Slant light on water, a whale's spine breaking the skin, a sudden rip that pulled a boat sideways and reminded you how quickly a life could be remade. I had grown up learning to read the surface for the thing beneath. I knew the word came from down there, from something darker. My name is Ailsa Muir, and the child under my palm was busy with a hiccuping rhythm that made me smile before I could stop myself. The baby didn't know the way a town can curl into itself around a story, the way rumor becomes weather. The scan had said what it said, and the sonographer had pressed her lips together the way the women here press pastry edges, precise, worried, set. She had pointed at a gray tide pool on the screen, and then she had said, gently, "Sometimes pictures lie." But someone at the clinic talked to someone who knew someone who once worked at Dr. Lennox, and by the time I crossed the square this morning, Kilbracken had decided it wouldn't be a baby at all, wouldn't be a person, wouldn't be anything, just a warning carved into a woman. "Morning, Ailsa," called Mary from the bakery, with a cheerfulness too bright, like a porch light left on at noon. "Try the cardamom buns, on the house." On the house meant I was a house that needed filling up. On the house meant charity disguised as kindness, disguised as fear. I accepted them anyway. A woman needs sweetness when the world sours. I tucked the warm roll bag into my basket beside the haddock and spring onions, and thought about how people in Kilbracken told their care through things: frozen pies, favors, anonymous paid tabs at the co-op. Cruelty was what they told through words. "Monster," said a voice again, not at my back this time, but somewhere near my ear, a whisper shaped as if to keep it safe. I turned to find Hamish Fraser's boy leaning against the ice locker, his cap backwards, his face the slick blank of someone trying to impress older boys. He flicked his eyes down to my belly with a dare and then away fast, as if he'd looked at the sun. That's what my dad says. He wanted me to slap him or cry. I didn't either. I put 2 fingers against the cool metal of the locker and said, very quietly, "Tell your dad I said he should keep faith with the tide. It does right by those who respect it." The boy pulled a face as if I'd spoken a spell and darted away, knees knocking. The market moved on, banners ribboned in the wind for the midsummer gathering, kilts and suit bags, fiddles and cases, the canvas of tents whispering. The gathering brought people back who'd left, and people who thought they might yet belong, and people like me who were born here and could never fully leave even if they drove for hours and kept driving. This year, it would bring the chief. We didn't call him Laird, too feudal, and he wasn't the chief of everything. The Highlands were studded with other names and other families and fractured histories. But here, the MacInnes line still held in the old house above the brae, and here, when things needed settling, we looked to Ian MacInnes with his listening face and his quiet hands, the way you look to a lighthouse, not because it can calm the sea, but because it convinces you that a shape in the storm knows your name. He'd been away for a season after his wife died, traveling among cousins and staying in houses where the floors slanted from age and conversations slanted from grief. He returned in spring like a black-throated diver, precise and unchanged. When he walked the town, we straightened without knowing why. I'd not seen him since the clinic day, since the sonographer's mouth tightened and my breath did too, since I walked home not because I trusted my feet, but because the air was the only honest thing I could find. The rumor took root then faster than the foxgloves. It was partly my fault. I'd kept the father to myself, and where people lack a fact, they will grow a story like mold. There had been a man once, there had been a winter, There had been me waking in the night, clenching at the echo of footsteps already gone. I told no one his name. He was kind and complicated, and belonged to someone else's life. And to speak him here would be to plant him in shallow soil, for strangers to pull up and shake for sport. The baby was mine. That was all the truth Kilbracken got. "I could look in on you," offered Mary when I looped back for oatcakes, dropping her voice as if a higher volume might disturb whatever dark fish swam under my skin. "I'm managing," I said. "If I need you, I'll shout." "You won't," she said, half proud, half pleading. And that was true too. I was the one people came to when the pipes froze, or the engine wouldn't start, or the hens decided they were ducks and moved out. I'd run the small boatyard since my father's stroke. I learned to hinge a motor in my sleep, to read weather hunches off the line where sky bruised water, and to negotiate with parts suppliers who assumed any woman phoning at 7 a.m. was arranging flowers. I had learned to make quiet into something useful. And yet quiet has a way of making a woman into a room with a locked door. People guess at what's inside. Now they had decided it was horror. I wanted to take my belly down to the slip where the granite met the sea and tell the child about the world. Here's the curve of the harbor that holds us like a cupped hand. Here's the hill where the heather lights up even when the sky forgets how to do it. Here's the path where your grandmother wore the grass smooth going to and from the shop with a string bag that could fit a miracle. Here's the boatyard where your mother learned how a thing fits together and how it floats and how it can carry you when your own limbs fail. Here is a town that forgets itself sometimes and then remembers. I wanted to pour that remembering in, like water on dry roots. Instead, I went home to the cottage on the edge of the gorse and looked at the list on the fridge, the way I'd always done when my thoughts tried to turn into weather. The list read, check bilge pumps for big, order cot, install blackout curtains, call Dr. Lennox about iron tablets, repair creel boat prop, write letter to mum, return library book. I added in small letters, buy paint. Not for the walls, for something I couldn't yet name. The cottage smelled of pine boards and clean oil. My father's tools hung like a choir in the shed out back, heavy with histories I could lift. When he first left the boatyard to my hands, the men came with questions delivered as jokes. "You sure you can tell a keel from a kipper, Elsa?" They hadn't noticed I'd grown in the sound of these tools, that I knew which wrench sung under which bolt. They learned. The stubborn do, eventually. I made tea and sat at the scrubbed table and placed the mug on the ring that had been there since the first day we moved in. A ship's horn sounded somewhere beyond the point. A drizzle touched the glass and beaded. I laid my hand flat on my belly again, felt the small foot pressing under my skin, and did not think of monsters. I counted steady breaths. I imagined painting the future, one careful brush line at a time, in a color I hadn't chosen yet. By afternoon, the clouds broke into something like applause, and shafts of light pawed at the hills. I went back to the harbor to check on Big, the wee launch whose engine loved to sulk, and there he was, Chief Ian, standing at the end of the quay with his cap in his hands, looking into the distance as if the horizon might talk back. He turned as if I'd heard my thoughts approach. "Elsa," he said, simply. My name in his voice was a thing set down, anchored, returned to its place. "Walk?" We went along the quay past the cleats, past the frayed rope that everyone promised to bin, and no one did. He did not speak until we reached the last step where the sea slapped the stone in an old, reliable rhythm. Then he leaned on the rail and looked at the water as if it might offer a second opinion. "I hear what people are saying," he said. No surprise there. When Kilbracken chose a word, it stuck to boots and traveled. "And I hear what you are not saying." I followed the line of foam where a seal had swum. "What is that?" He flicked his glance to my hands and then back to the sea, giving me the grace of not staring. "That you are alone in this, that you have to be." He flicked his glance to my hands and then back to the sea, giving me the grace of not staring. "There's a shape to this place. Sometimes it holds, sometimes it traps. It's our work to make sure it's more the former than the latter. If you're here to tell me to go to Inverness, to be somewhere bigger where no one cares what my baby looks like on a screen." He shook his head.
I'm here to tell you about the gathering. I know about the gathering. I heard the defensiveness in my voice, and I disliked it. I know about the marches and the music and the men who think they invented dancing. The gathering is also where we name what we intend to protect. He slid his cap into his pocket and straightened, his shoulders squaring to some ceremony I couldn't see. There are old ways and there are new ways, and there are ways we make because the old ones aren't enough and the new ones don't know our weather. When my father was chief, he blessed boats at the quay. People said it was for luck. He said it was to remind the town that we launch each other into the hard parts. I've been thinking we've lost some of that.
I looked up at him, startled at the way my chest warmed, a hearth in it where there had only been smoke. What are you suggesting? That we do a public thing, he said, a small smile touching the corner of his mouth. Not because you need a spectacle, because the town needs a better story than the one it's telling. I don't want to be a story, I said. I want to be left in peace to finish what I started. Peace rarely comes to those who avoid the square, he said, kindly. Let we stand with you in it. What I heard under his words was older than language. I will not let them make you small. He didn't say the baby's name because there wasn't one yet, and he didn't ask about the father. He asked about paint, of all things. Do you have any? He said. Plant-based, safe for skin. I laughed despite myself. Oddly enough, I wrote it on my list this morning. Bring it, he said. Tomorrow evening, at the Hill. We'll make something that this place has not seen in a while. What if they say no? I asked. What if the council... The council will be surprised, he said. Surprise is not a no. He left me there with the sound of the water and that ridiculous request for paint. I went home and took my father's tackle box down from the shelf, the one he'd repurposed for household things once he'd stopped hauling. Brushes, old tins, pigment. I found a small jar of blue he had labeled with his impossible handwriting, "Woad, mix with honey." My mouth went dry. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager, when he'd painted my face for the games as a joke, and Mum had scolded us both for being daft and then laughed as she scrubbed it off later. The jar's lid turned with a hiss of memory. I set it beside the chamomile lotion from the co-op and the little bottle of jojoba oil and thought of skin as shoreline. I wanted whatever touched mine to do so like an incoming tide, deliberate, cleansing, shore. Sleep came in little stitches that night. The baby rolled like a boat in a light swell. My mind counted heartbeats at the window, all the small lives the town had held and dropped and caught again. In the morning, the sky was a fortitude of gray, and the gulls worked the bins like thieves, laughing. The word was out, of course. If Ian McInnes took one step with intention, the town took two in curiosity. By noon, men had stopped by the boatyard under pretexts as thin as tissue. You got that 10 mil spawner? Any spare rope? And left with eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. When evening leaned over the hill, the town gathered. The pasture above the brae was already tufted flat by the season's Shetlands, and the banners made a quick C in the wind. Fiddles tuned, pipers tested their drones, children ricocheted and were retrieved by aunties. The air smelled of peat smoke and fried dough, and the ridge of the world looked closer than it ever did in winter. I carried the small basket with the paint and the oil and a clean cloth. I walked straight, my hand firm on my belly, the way one carries the helm over chop. Ian stood near the center as if he'd been grown there, a weathered post around which the lines of the place had been tied. The council was there, tight-mouthed already. Myri wiped her hands on her apron and hovered at the edge of my peripheral vision, a bird ready to fly to me or away, depending on how the air moved.
Hamish Fraser stood with his arms folded, his boy beside him with a sullen tilt to his mouth that made him look older and smaller at once. The fiddles fell quiet so quickly, it felt like someone had pulled sound up by the roots. He said, "We haven't blessed anything in a while. We've relied on habit. Habit is a fine keeper of doors, but a poor maker of welcome." He had a small smile touching the corner of his mouth. His eyes moved past each face, an inventory of belonging. "There is talk in the town. Talk tightens the chest. We need breath. We need an act to show us the shape we want to be." He turned to me, and though every eye did too, I felt seen by one gaze only. As have asked for no spectacle, but I have asked her to trust me that a public love can unmake a private fear. "I didn't ask for love," I said, surprising myself and the crowd, the words coming out clean as the sky had just become, as the sun slid below a cloud. "I asked for room to live." "And we will make it," he said, "by choosing." He held out his hands. I gave him the jar of blue and the small flask of oil, and he mixed them in a little bowl with the seriousness of someone making bread. The crowd was utterly still. Somewhere a dog barked twice, emergency detail for no one's crisis. He looked at me, and his eyes, blue as the paint, asked and waited. I nodded. I pulled the hem of my linen dress up, and the evening air kissed my belly cool. A small collective inhale went through the crowd, shame doing what it always does, trying to hide the very thing that needed sun. My skin rose in goosebumps. The baby made a small kick as if greeting the sky. Ian dipped 2 fingers in the blue, and then, with a steadiness that made my throat hurt, he drew a spiral centered around my navel, slow, widening, then crossing it with a line that pointed outward, toward the sea. The paint felt like a soft, seaweeded wave. He did not draw a cross. He did not draw a symbol that belonged to anyone else's claim. He drew the possibility of turning out instead of in. He said nothing while he painted. I didn't know whether he held words behind his teeth or whether he believed the shape on my skin should speak itself. When he finished, he placed his palm lightly against the curve he had made, as if setting a seal. Then he turned to the town. "There," he said, "this child is of us, not because we own her, because we are responsible to her. She will be born to a world made by our choices. Choose, then, to be the kind who make room." A breeze moved and banners shivered as if someone had passed through them. For a moment, nothing happened, and then Myri stepped forward and put her shoulder on mine, and then Ewan MacLeod, who never touched anyone, put his hand on Ian's back, and then Mrs. Dalrymple, who had always glared at me like I'd tracked mud into her parlor, nodded twice sharply and wiped at her eyes as if smoke had got in. The dog barked again, this time in celebration. Hamish Fraser stayed back. His boy's mouth worked as if chewing a stone. "Chosen," said Ian, and the word, which I had always despised for how it made not chosen of everyone else, felt in his mouth like a task, not a crown. As not above, as among, he held up his blue-tipped fingers, and the children laughed, and then tried to shush themselves, and then failed, and the laughter moved like a hair through heather, quick, relieving, alive. I did not understand until I did. The painting wasn't magic, and it wasn't witness. It was a line we could point to later and say, "There, we began again. People need a there." I looked down at my belly and felt, for the first time in days, that I could say to the child without lying, "You will be met." Of course, not everyone was content. A murmuring started near the back where the men who like a good mutter do their best work. The council's chair, Mr. Beaton, squinted as if trying to find an ordinance to explain us back into fear. He failed. There isn't one yet. Hamish took a step forward, dragging his son by the sleeve reflexively. "What about when it comes out wrong?" he asked, loud enough for the question to carry, but pitched as if it were a reasonable inquiry, the way a man asks if the weather is fit to fish when he has already decided not to go. "What about when it's born looking—" He didn't finish. The failure to finish a cruel sentence sounds like mercy. It isn't. It's cowardice dressed as concern. "Then we will learn how to love what we do not expect," he said without heat, that make the statement sound less like a scalpel and more like a hand. "We do it every day. We love each other." "But there were signs," Hamish insisted, and Mr. Beaton nodded once, sloppy agreement. "Dr. Lennox will tell you. The scan." "The scan told us a story about light and shadow," I said, my voice steady because the paint had cooled into a certainty on my skin. "It didn't tell us about this child's capacity for wonder or stubbornness or the way I stopped myself from saying she, as if I could tempt fate with a pronoun. "The way the baby will learn the lines of your faces and decide which to trust." "Hope is a fine thing," Hamish said. He meant foolish. He meant naive. He meant women. "Hope is a decision," said Myri from beside me, surprising herself, and then, because she'd surprised herself, she laughed at her own bravery and pressed her mouth into a line that said she would not apologize for it. The band started up again.
I stood there absorbing the lines of faces, trying to memorize this strange new shape, the world as it had been 5 minutes ago and the world as it might yet become. Anne stepped a little closer. "Hard part's done," he said, sotto voce. "I don't think so," I said. "I think we just built a stage." He smiled wryly. "Then we better perform something worth the ticket." We both heard it before we saw it, the sudden change in the way the crowd breathed. Collective intakes have their own pitch. The laughter broke like a net. The blue on my skin seemed to congeal. People parted toward the path from the road, and through that channel came 2 men in dark jackets with no badges, the kind who carry authority not because someone gave it to them, but because they've decided they deserve it. Behind them, Mrs. Fraser, Hamish's wife, clutched her cardigan at her throat in a way that tried to say she had nothing to do with it. Mr. Beaton's eyes lit up with the particular joy of a bureaucrat about to become useful. "You," said the taller of the 2 men, jabbing a finger before his feet had stopped moving. "You're the one from the clinic. We've had a report. We've had a night. What you've had can wait until you've learned to greet people." His voice was courteous and deadly, which is the tone of a Highland welcome if you arrive wrong. "Midwifery services," the man snapped, flipping a laminated card up to the sky as if the clouds needed identification. He didn't look at me when he first said it. He looked at the paint. "There are concerns about the welfare of the unborn child." "There always are," I said, and I felt my mouth move before my mind decided it would. Strange how they surface only when a woman declines to be ashamed. "We've had an anonymous tip about practices," the shorter one said, as if the words smelled. "Unhygienic ritual, paint, exposure." "It's plant dye," Myri hotly. "You've never seen a henna hand? Or is the problem that this one isn't on a wedding night?" The taller man finally looked at my face. "We'll need you to come with us for an evaluation." He said it like a line he'd used before on people who had nowhere else to stand. "You are not going anywhere," Anne said. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The crowd drew a little closer to me, not in siege, but like a wall. "If there's an evaluation to be done, it can be done here, in daylight, with witnesses who care about the outcome. Privacy laws," the shorter man said. "Care has never been our privacy," Anne said, a line so clean I could have set it above my door. I felt the baby turn, a slow, low roll, as if adjusting to listen. Under my palm, the painted spiral warmed with the heat of my skin. I wanted to be brave with the elegance of a woman in a story, and instead I was brave the way gravel is, small, many, stubborn, adjustable to weight. "We can talk," I said, "but not like this."
I looked at Hamish because the boy matter-of-factly held his father's hand with an intensity that made me believe anything could change. He dropped it when he saw me look and scowled to erase the tenderness, but I had seen. Anne gestured to the bandstand, which was only a pallet on two sawhorses. He stepped up onto it and turned to face the men. Any evaluation will be done in the hearing of this town, because the rumors started in the hearing of this town. We are not going to be small in public and big in private. We are going to be one size. He held out a hand to me. I took it and stepped up beside him. The baby pressed like a question against the paint. The taller man opened his mouth to protest again, but people had tired of the theater of his authority. Questions rose not as a heckle, but as an accounting. What test? What risk? Asked Mrs. Dalrymple, startling herself again. What happens if she refuses? Asked someone I couldn't see. What happens if you consent and then you use that consent against her later? Asked someone else. The men were not built for the democracy of a Highland crowd. Their shoulders slumped into irritation, that helpless cousin of control. We'll return in the morning, the taller one said finally, retreating to the promise of paperwork. In the meantime, we advise against any further exposure. He flapped a hand at my belly, having lost the nerve to say the word again. Advise all you like, Myrie said. We've got our own weather. The men left with the look of cliffs after an argument with the sea. Their edges stayed, but something had been taken from them. The music tried to resume. People tried to strap back on their normal as if it were a life jacket they'd kicked off by mistake. But the air had altered. Everyone wondered what the morning would bring, and everyone pretended they didn't. Anne hopped down from the pallet and offered me a hand back to the grass, as if I hadn't been the one to help him up a ladder 100 times to fix the gutters on the hall. He was good at playing both tall and equal. It's what kept him in the old house without people throwing stones at the windows. It will get worse before it gets better, I said, wiping a smear of blue from his fingers with the cloth. That's how storms work when they come from the inside. It will get more honest, he said, which is what better is, even when we wish it weren't. I went home under a sky that hadn't decided what to do with itself. The path along the gorse held the day's warmth like a hand. I had the odd sense I was being followed and turned twice to see no one. At the gate, I paused. My cottage stood as it always had, small and square and full of my life. The door was ajar. I had not left it so.
The truth did not wash away with rain. It dried on my skin like a vow. By morning, the paint Brannock had laid across my belly felt as much a part of me as the child beneath it. When I breathed, the spirals rose and fell as if they were lungs of their own. When the baby turned, the lines seemed to turn too, as though the old marks could feel the new life. I dressed slowly, not to hide the paint, but to steady my hands. I tied back my hair, rinsed the last stubborn ash from the hearth, and opened the shutters to a sky that had not yet chosen a mood. The village did not wait for me to step into it. It reached its gaze through the window first. I met it without flinching. I had decided in the night, with my fingers resting over paint and heartbeat, if a storm was coming, I would walk into it standing up. The lane was damp and clean. Chickens were already arguing in the dust about matters as old as feathers. I lifted the latch and felt the cool of iron in my palm, a sensible reminder that metal does not care if it is praised or cursed. It holds. I held, too. I needed bread. I needed salt. I needed to be seen doing things that did not belong to fear. At the gate, I paused. Someone had left a small posy of heather tucked between the slats, a humble bravery with the stems wrapped in red thread. There was no note. I smelled the hand that left it anyway, the shy milk sour of a young mother. I set the posy on the sill inside my door and stepped out. Eyes found me before voices did. Old Mrs. Thorne drew as thin as her needles, then softened when I met her. A pair of boys stopped a game of stones mid-throw as if my passing had interrupted gravity. A dog made a question of its head and decided in my favor. I walked to the baker with my palms open and my shoulders square. When the bell over the door rang, the sound ran through the room like a dare. Mara, the baker's wife, kept her eyes on the peel she wielded and said, "Morning," with a voice that tried to be a bridge. She had the good manners to let me start. 2 loaves, I said, and whatever small sweetness survived the dawn. "There is honey buns," she said, "and one currant twist left if the cat hasn't claimed it." She slid the loaves into paper bags and only then looked at me, first my face, then my belly, then my face again. She did not draw back from what she saw. "He painted you," she said. And there was wonder in the words rather than judgment. "He did," I said, "with my consent." I let the sentence land. Consent is a hinge that keeps doors from swinging the wrong way. Mara nodded once, a small, fierce acknowledgement of something she also kept in her house. She moved the currant twist to my side of the counter and covered it with paper, as if to shield it from opinions. "No charge," she said. When I put coins down anyway, she let them sit and did not push them back. We understood each other. Charity can bruise as easily as hunger. Outside, the square had more voices than it should so early. Men gathered in clumps, their tucks slick with rehearsal. Hale, Councilman Hale, to those who believed paper could keep weather out, was adjusting his cuffs as if the day were a meeting and he intended to chair it. Cale leaned in the tavern doorway with his hands buried in his coat for the look of it, his mouth bent in that smile he wore like a knife half-sheathed. He saw me and let the smile widen. It was not for welcome. He wanted the story to pass under his fingers on its way to the crowd. "So," he said, loud enough, "the old man put his mark on you. Did he sanctify what you couldn't make right?" "What needed sanctifying was our fear," I said evenly. "Your fear," he corrected, and tilted his head the way he does when he thinks he's cut a truth to size. "I sleep fine," he said. "You sleep wherever people don't know better yet," I said. "That's not the same as sleeping." I did not wait for the laugh he wanted. I moved past him and felt the eyes at my back widen, then blink, then narrow. I carried bread and sweetness. I carried the paint. I carried the baby. I carried myself. By midday, I had returned home and found Sarah's shadow at my gate. She stood with her hands on the latch but did not open it until I nodded. When she came up the path, she did not start with apology or excuse. She started with work. "May I listen?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and lifted my dress to show her the paint. The way her breath caught was not fear this time. It was relief wearing a sensible face. She pressed her ear, her palm, then her little trumpet to my skin. She counted quietly. She waited for a kick and smiled when it came. She said, "Strong." The word unclenched a muscle in my throat I had not known I was clenching. "May I come back this evening?" "Yes." I wanted to say also, "You may stay, you may bring your bag back into this house, you may put your hands where the fear once forbade you." But permission is a kind of love best given in pieces to people who have learned not to trust it all at once. When she left, I wrote on a scrap of paper with my blunt pencil: water, towels, salt, threads, knife, warmth. I liked seeing the list become a shape I could hold. I filled the kettle, I changed the sheets, I laid the baby clothes in a neat pile and smoothed them once, twice, because smoothing what is small helps when the world is rumpled. Toward evening, Brannick came. He did not knock this time. He breathed at the door, and the house knew him. He carried a small bowl wrapped in cloth, and the smell of wet wool and heather followed him in. "He'll gather on the green," he said, as if telling me where the tide would be at dusk. I told them I would speak, and that if they had objections, they should learn to raise them where their voices could be weighed by wind. His mouth made a wire line. "Some prefer closed rooms for their righteousness. I prefer doors," I said. "They let things in and out, even light. We'll stand in it then. Do you want to be seen again?" "Yes," I said, and felt the clean click of a lock opening the right way. The green filled by the time the sun made a dull coin of itself on the horizon. People who had claimed they would not come had come. People who had thought to stand far back edged forward as if proximity might translate to courage. Sarah stood with her bag at her feet, fingers laced, as if she did not trust them to stay where they belonged. Hale put his hands behind his back to look important and to hide the way they wanted to ring. Cale loitered at the edge of the tavern with men who loved to be asked to leave and loved even better to refuse.
Brannock did not climb a barrel or a box. He did not raise his arms. He simply stepped to the old standing stone, and the space around him knew to make room. "We blessed nothing for a long while," he said, his voice the texture of peat smoke. "We assumed habit would suffice. It has not. We made a mark yesterday because fear had too much of the speaking. We make it again tonight because fear has a cousin called insistence. He turned to me. Alira. I lifted my dress just enough to bear the paint to the dusk. There was a ripple, a hush, and then the collective exhale that the human body makes when it remembers it is not alone. Brannock wet his fingers with oil and pigment and traced the spirals again, not to make them new, but to say, still here. He made small commas at my hips, soft pauses that promised continuation. He set his palm to the center and waited until the baby answered with a push that made me wince and smile together. He turned to the village. This life is not ours to own, he said. It is ours to answer for. Choose to be the kind who answer well. He could have said more. He could have said history and law and bloodlines. He could have said myth and men. He said enough. Authority arrived in a jacket and the smell of ink. 2 county men shouldered through, and the larger held papers like a blade. Alira Marin, he said, flattening my name into syllables that fit his form. You are required to attend a medical evaluation at the clinic due to reports of ritualistic behavior causing risk to an unborn child. Sarah stepped into the space between their paper and my skin. I am the midwife, she said, voice steady. Examinations go through me. If you wish to protect the child, you do not wrench the mother from her house in front of her neighbors like a thief taken from market. Procedure, the man said. Care, Sarah returned. We can perform an assessment here, with your consent. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a bridge I had laid myself. Brannock lifted his coat with another woman and made a small room with it. Sarah listened again, measured again, and spoke loud enough for men who needed numbers to believe what ears had already learned. Heart strong, position good, no immediate risk. I find no cause for removal. The men disliked the edges of their papers softening in the rain of public air. We'll return, the tall one said, with an order. Return with more courage, then, Brannock said mildly, the kind that lets you admit you arrived wrong. They went. The talk they left behind swirled and then settled in layers. Some faces unfolded, Mara, Mrs. Thorne, and Sarah. Some folded tighter, Hale, Cale. But the evening also held something new, the small sound a crowd makes when a lie has been told against it and a better story has been offered. It is not cheering. It is relief, wearing caution. We broke. People went to their pots and their beds. I went home with Sarah's hand briefly on my arm and Brannock's hand briefly on my back, 2 points of contact that felt like rope thrown to a swimmer. At my door, chalk did what chalk does when a child is given more fear than play. Monster, in fat letters that smudged under my finger. I wiped it away with the heel of my hand until I had a gray palm and a clean door. Brannock drew a small spiral over the latch with what pigment remained. Here, he said, if they must read, let them read this. I slept in slices. In one slice, I was swimming. In another, I was standing at the green while the village knelt without meaning to. In another, I was alone at the market and every basket held stones. Between slices, the baby moved like a creature testing a new den. Close to dawn, I woke with the clean sense of having chosen something correctly. I made porridge and ate it. I boiled water. I set towels by the hearth. I opened the window to the smell of wet earth and the faintest edge of smoke from somewhere far and ordinary. When the first contraction wrapped me, it did not ask politely. It came as a hand from the inside, turning. I bowed to it and breathed the way Sarah had re-taught me, counting out, counting in. It passed, leaving behind a new air in the room, the charged kind that comes before thunder. I marked the time on the scrap of paper. 10 minutes later, the second came. I put the kettle on and sent Mara's boy to Sarah with a note which read only, "It is time." Sarah arrived with her hair braided tight and her bag swinging. She did not begin with anything other than work. She listened, she measured, she timed. Good, she said after 3 pains. You're well begun. She looked around my small house as if checking the edges for leaks. Do you want anyone else? I want you, I said. I surprised myself with the certainty. And if Brannock wanders by, let him put wood on the fire and keep men with paper from crossing the threshold. Brannock did more than wander. He arrived like weather arriving, felt before seen. He set wood, stoked until the fire settled into its most useful kind of heat, and stood at the door with a patience that spoke to the lane. People passed. They pretended to be going somewhere else. He nodded to them anyway. "You'll tell them?" I asked between two pains. "There is going to be a baby here this evening." He said, "I already have, and the ones who needed telling twice, I told 3 times. The ones who didn't need telling, I thanked." The pains grew teeth. The pace narrowed. Time changed texture. It was no longer a string of moments, but a tide I rose and fell inside. I walked the small path between table and hearth until the boards learned my weight and gave back what I needed. Sarah's voice braided into my breathing, deep, low, now. When I leaned over the back of the chair, Brannock's hand hovered where it might help and did not touch until I said, "Touch," and then it steadied without taking. The knock on the door could have been wind if wind carried arrogance. Brannock opened to the shape it brought. Hale, grim with borrowed righteousness, Cale, eager as a dog that has learned to bark at the wrong times, and a countyman I recognized from the green and another I did not recognize. Slicked and pressed, eyes small and correct. He held a folder that looked like it would like to be a sword when it grew up. "Alira Marin," the new one said, and even my name wanted to step away from his mouth. "I am Officer Pike. By order of the county court, you are to be transported for observation. We have credible reports of risk to the unborn child." Sarah stepped into the space between their paper and my skin. "I am the midwife," she said, not pausing in her count. "Examinations go through me. If you wish to protect the child, you do not wrench the mother from her house in front of her neighbors like a thief taken from market." "Procedure," the man said. "Care," Sarah returned. "We can perform an assessment here, with your consent." "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a bridge I had laid myself. A contraction lifted then, and I wrote it with my eyes open on Pike's face. I let him see what the word "no" looks like when a woman in labor shapes it with her whole body.
"Obstruction," he said to Brannock, as if naming a crime might create one. "Witnesses," Brannock replied, and stepped aside just enough for Pike to see past him into the lane. The village had come. Not to shout, not to cheer, to stand. They filled the road shoulder to shoulder the way people stand when a river creeps up to their doors and they decide to be a dam until morning. Mara, apron dusted with flour, Mrs. Thorne small and sharp, boys who had written chalk and rubbed it away with their sleeves, old men whose hands remembered ropes, girls with their hair in rags for curls who would rinse them out only when this was done. Even Hale's wife, who had learned silence from a young age and was now breaking the habit in a small way by not being where he told her to be. "This is unlawful," Pike said again, but less loudly. The rain began the way truth begins, quiet, undeniable. "You may fetch more paper," Brannock said. "The door will still be here when you return. So will we." He did not shut the door in Pike's face. He did not have to. The lane closed it for him. Pike retreated 3 steps with dignity and a 4th with irritation. Cale lingered. He always liked the edge between violence and audience. But the sound I made when the next pain tore through me sent him back like a fish darting for the dark under a rock. Hale muttered something about safety and tried to hold his Bible like a shield. It looked like a small book held by a small man. After that, there was only the work. I learned again that the body knows how to make a door. Sarah's hands were everywhere and only ever where they needed to be. She fed me honey with the care of a sister and pressed my lower back with the force of a widow who had learned the usefulness of her strength. Brannock kept the fire tender and the kettle obedient and the threshold defended. The village breathed beyond the door, a low, steadying hum that made the walls feel thicker. The storm that had been threatening all day arrived with a noise that made even the baby still a moment to listen. Thunder banked itself along the ridge and rolled down like loose barrels. The lap shook once and steadied. The rain hardened into coins. Somewhere,
too near. Lightning found the line along the lane and crackled it. I smelled the sharp, wrong scent of singed wire. "The hall," Brannock said quietly from the window. "It's caught at the side." "The linen," Sarah said, her mind doing midwife's arithmetic, clean cloth, clamps, bowls, and then shook herself quiet. "We stay," she repeated. "We have what we need." Another pain took me, and with it the last of my ability to care about anything that wasn't happening in the bowl of my pelvis. "Now," Sarah said, and then, "Wait," when she needed me to let my body stretch without tearing. I obeyed. It felt like disobeying every scream inside me. "Good," she murmured, a prayer and a report. "Good, Illyra, good." Outside, men shouted, women ordered, children were sent to fetch and not look. The roof at the hall hissed and then spat fire again when a beam let go. "Hold the line!" Brannock shouted into the lane, and his voice came back to us as if the houses themselves had carried it along their eaves. "No one goes in!" Sarah's face was very close to mine. "Hair," she said, joy cutting through the grit of her work. "Your child has hair." She laughed once, short and surprised, as if the world had made a joke for her in the middle of a storm. "All right, Illyra. When I say, you push like you are not here, but a river heading where you always meant to go." I gathered myself. The next contraction crowned me with fire. I bore down. The room widened and narrowed in the same second. A sign came out of me I did not know I owned. "Stop," she commanded, and I did, panting like a dog so I would not rip the border between what I had been and what I was about to be. "Good," she murmured, again, and on the again I felt the head slip to a place from which there would be no going back. That was when the siren cut the lane. It sliced the rain in two. Officer Pike's voice followed on a horn, magnified and thin, as if it had been stretched. "By order of the county court, the child will be removed upon birth." My body wanted to reorder the world in that instant. It wanted to pull the baby back and bar the door and swallow the horn. It wanted to become stone and keep everything inside. Sarah's hand pressed my knee and brought me back to a smaller, harder mercy. "Look at me," she said, and I did. "Eyes here. This is your work. Theirs is noise." Brannock's silhouette filled the doorway again. He did not answer Pike with law. He answered with something older, something that came from the ribs. "Over my dead," he began, and the thunder spoke the rest for him with a crack so close it rattled the crockery. "Now," Sarah said, and I let go. I pushed into a world that might try to take what I made, and I decided with everything I had that it would have to learn a new meaning for take. The head slid free into Sarah's hands, and for a moment, the room held the most fragile silence I had ever been given. The breath between a life being under the skin and a life being in the air. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat. It lasted forever. And then, from the lane, from the hall, from the horn, from Brannock's word caught under thunder, from the village standing in the rain, the night inhaled as one, and I braced my hands against the rug, opened my mouth, and reached for the last breath I would need before I brought the rest of my child into the light.
"Obstruction," he said to Brannock, as if naming a crime might create one. "Witnesses," Brannock replied, and stepped aside just enough for Pike to see past him into the lane. The village had come. Not to shout, not to cheer, to stand. They filled the road shoulder to shoulder the way people stand when a river creeps up to their doors and they decide to be a dam until morning. Mara, apron dusted with flour, Mrs. Thorne small and sharp, boys who had written chalk and rubbed it away with their sleeves, old men whose hands remembered ropes, girls with their hair in rags for curls who would rinse them out only when this was done. Even Hale's wife, who had learned silence from a young age and was now breaking the habit in a small way by not being where he told her to be. "This is unlawful," Pike said again, but less loudly. The rain began the way truth begins, quiet, undeniable. "You may fetch more paper," Brannock said. "The door will still be here when you return. So will we." He did not shut the door in Pike's face. He did not have to. The lane closed it for him. Pike retreated 3 steps with dignity and a 4th with irritation. Cale lingered. He always liked the edge between violence and audience. But the sound I made when the next pane tore through me sent him back like a fish darting for the dark under a rock. Hale muttered something about safety and tried to hold his Bible like a shield. It looked like a small book held by a small man. After that, there was only the work. I learned again that the body knows how to make a door. Sarah's hands were everywhere and only ever where they needed to be. She fed me honey with the care of a sister and pressed my lower back with the force of a widow who had learned the usefulness of her strength. Brannock kept the fire tender and the kettle obedient and the threshold defended. The village breathed beyond the door, a low, steadying hum that made the walls feel thicker. The storm that had been threatening all day arrived with a noise that made even the baby still a moment to listen. Thunder banked itself along the ridge and rolled down like loose barrels. The lap shook once and steadied. The rain hardened into coins. Somewhere, too near, lightning found the line along the lane and crackled it. I smelled the sharp, wrong scent of singed wire. "The hall," Brannock said quietly from the window. "It's caught at the side." "The linen," Sarah said, her mind doing midwife's arithmetic, clean cloth, clamps, bowls, and then shook herself quiet. "We stay," she repeated. "We have what we need." Another pain took me, and with it the last of my ability to care about anything that wasn't happening in the bowl of my pelvis. "Now," Sarah said, and then, "Wait," when she needed me to let my body stretch without tearing. I obeyed. It felt like disobeying every scream inside me. "Good," she murmured, a prayer and a report. "Good, Illyra, good." Outside, men shouted, women ordered, children were sent to fetch and not look. The roof at the hall hissed and then spat fire again when a beam let go. "Hold the line!" Brannock shouted into the lane, and his voice came back to us as if the houses themselves had carried it along their eaves. "No one goes in!" Sarah's face was very close to mine. "Hair," she said, joy cutting through the grit of her work. "Your child has hair." She laughed once, short and surprised, as if the world had made a joke for her in the middle of a storm. "All right, Illyra. When I say, you push like you are not here, but a river heading where you always meant to go." I gathered myself. The next contraction crowned me with fire. I bore down. The room widened and narrowed in the same second. A sign came out of me I did not know I owned. "Stop," she commanded. And I did, panting like a dog, so I would not rip the border between what I had been and what I was about to be. "Good," she murmured, again, and on the again I felt the head slip to a place from which there would be no going back. That was when the siren cut the lane. It sliced the rain in two. Officer Pike's voice followed on a horn, magnified and thin, as if it had been stretched. "By order of the county court, the child will be removed upon birth." My body wanted to reorder the world in that instant. It wanted to pull the baby back and bar the door and swallow the horn. It wanted to become stone and keep everything inside. Sarah's hand pressed my knee and brought me back to a smaller, harder mercy. "Look at me," she said, and I did. "Eyes here. This is your work. Theirs is noise." Brannock's silhouette filled the doorway again. He did not answer Pike with law. He answered with something older, something that came from the ribs. "Over my dead
he began, and the thunder spoke the rest for him with the crack so close it rattled the crockery. Now, Sarah said, and I let go. I pushed into a world that might try to take what I made, and I decided with everything I had that it would have to learn a new meaning for take. The head slid free into Sarah's hands, and for a moment, the room held the most fragile silence I had ever been given. The breath between a life being under the skin and a life being in the air. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat. It lasted forever. And then, from the lane, from the hall, from the horn, from Bronick's word caught under thunder, from the village standing in the rain, the night inhaled as one, and I braced my hands against the rug, opened my mouth, and reached for the last breath I would need before I brought the rest of my child into the light.
Light. The room held it like a bowl holds water, a trembling, precious edge. Sarah's hands were sure, her voice a low bridge between my breath and the work still left. "One more, Alira," she said. Not pleading, not commanding, inviting. I gathered what was left of me and pushed. The rest of my child slid into the world with a hot rush and a wet sigh. For a beat, the thunder seemed to stop to listen. Sarah caught the small, slippery certainty and moved with the economy of a woman who has learned not to waste miracles. "Here," she whispered, and the word was both a place and a promise. She laid the baby straight onto my chest, skin against skin, heat to heat. I was not ready for the size of her. I had prepared for monstrosities the way the village had rehearsed them in its mouth. I had armored myself against pity and horror alike. Instead, there was a person the length of my forearm, furious at the air and astonished by it in the same breath. Her hair was slicked flat and dark, a crown already. Her eyes, when she opened them, were the deep blue of a loch at dusk before it admits the stars. Her fists made the same small, angry bloom against my collarbone my own hands had made when I was a girl pretending not to cry. She did not cry at first. She blinked at me as if to ask who I was to have worked so hard to see her. The silence stretched thinner than I liked. "Talk to her," Sarah said, rubbing the tiny back with her palm. "Tell her the world is worth the trouble." I said her name without meaning to. I did not know I had it until it left my mouth. "Leora," I breathed. Light. She answered my audacity with a small, outraged sound that melted every armor I had ever learned to wear. Then she drew in her first proper breath and let out a cry that shook the rafters, the rain, the papers in Pike's sensible folder. The lane answered with a cheer that split itself quickly into laughter and tears, as if the village had been waiting all winter to exhale. "Clamp," Sarah said, and then, "Not yet," because she is not a butcher, but an artist, and an artist knows when a line is ready to be cut. She waited. Leora's cry settled into a busy, desperate rooting, a small mouth seeking what every creature seeks when it arrives, proof that wanting has an answer. I guided her. She found me like a compass finds north. Pike spoke from the lane through his horn, as if a shout could be gentled by metal. "Alira Marin, by order of the county court." "Not now," I said without looking up. My voice surprised me. It was quiet enough to be mistaken for sleep, absolute enough to be mistaken for law. The baby latched, and the world narrowed. Not in fear now, but in focus. There is a way a body answers that has nothing to do with argument. Sarah worked around us as if we were the hearth in the middle of a busy kitchen, tying, checking, laying warm linen. "Bleeding's within reason," she murmured, mostly to herself, mostly to me. "We'll keep it that way." Brannock stood in the doorway with rain in his hair and ash smudged along his jaw like war paint he hadn't put on. He did not step inside, as if anyone's purity required it. He stayed because thresholds are where chiefs do their best work. He did not look at Pike. He looked at the lane, at the faces, at the kettle, at me, at Leora. The corner of his mouth moved the way cliffs do when they have decided not to give way.
Cale shouldered forward because some men cannot bear it when the center of a room refuses their body. He pointed at the spiral painted above my latch and laughed the way a boy laughs when he means to break something and wants witnesses. There, he said to Pike and Hale. You see? Rituals, madness. This is what I told you. You told them many things, Sierra said, without lifting her head. Most of them about yourself. She cut the cord with a neat movement and placed the clamp as if setting a jewel. Leora complained once at the indignity and returned to the serious business of being alive. Hale tried to wedge his righteousness through the door. The order, came another voice, dry as tinder, does not override the immediate clinical judgment of the attending midwife. If Sierra says mother and child are stable, we proceed according to her plan. And my plan, she added with a glance that clipped Hale shorter than his Bible ever had, is to keep them together unless disaster insists. Does disaster insist? Sierra didn't look up from my legs. Disaster may apply tomorrow, she said. Tonight, we're well. Pike didn't like it. Men who wear policy like armor rarely enjoy finding out care is the heavier metal. He rechecked his papers in the rain as if water might wash them cleaner. We have reports, he said, in writing. And I have eyes, Dr. Rowan returned, on mother and child. There will be no separation tonight. She looked at me then, and the doctor vanished, and a person appeared. Your work is good, she said simply. Eat when you can. Sleep when you cannot. I'll return with the morning. The hall smoked itself quiet. Buckets clinked. Someone told a joke that went badly and people laughed anyway because sometimes you have to walk laughter all the way home after it's lost. The lane thinned as wet men and wet women turned back to their rooms, their bowls, their small ordinary reliances. Hale went with the look of a man who'd been told by a woman in spectacles that his authority had to learn to wear boots. Pike packed his horn with the careful irritation of a functionary whose function had been revealed to him. Cale lingered. He lingered too long. Hamish's eldest, Finn, thin as a whip and twice as quick, stepped out from the shadow of the hedge with a face full of scared courage and said, I saw him at the junction box. He was there before the lightning came. He had a tool. He looked at me, and then at Brannock, and then at the ground. I saw. The lane shifted. It didn't lunge. It didn't need to. Men who grown up loving their own strength like boys love pocket knives straightened up. But it was the women who closed the gap first. The bakers, the midwives, the laundresses, the ones with ash on their skirts and babies on their hips. They did not touch Cale. They simply stood where he wanted to stand, so that he had to stand somewhere else. It is a worse punishment than any blow. Cale tried for rage and found only noise. Lies, he said, but it sounded tired, even to him. He added, she's mine, and the pronoun landed in the rain like a coin no one bent to retrieve. I am not, I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not lift my head from Leora's breath. I have not been yours for some time, and this child belongs to herself. I felt as I said it, the old latch inside me shift positions, the kind that changes a door from shut to open and from open to shut. Leave my threshold. Brannock didn't move. He didn't have to. The village did it for him, making a small corridor of air where Cale could go without pretending someone had carried him. He went. When the last of his coat had gone past the hedge, the night seemed to drop a weight it had been holding too long. The rain softened. The thunder rolled itself farther among the ridge to bother someone else.
It was only then, as the adrenaline slunk out of my muscles like a thief, that the room tilted in a way I did not like. The edges went fuzzy. Heat ran out of me in a rush that had nothing to do with generosity. Sarah, I said, and even my own name sounded far away. Bleeding, she said. This time not calm, because calm is for show, and we were past shows. Rowan! The doctor was already there, hands sluiced, sleeves shoved, eyes keen. They worked with the kind of urgency that looks like peace when done by people who know it by heart,
Compress, tincture, the bitter draught I would have refused any other night and swallowed now like absolution. Brannock steadied my shoulder without placing weight on it, the way a good hand steadies a mast. "Stay with me," Sarah said, and I did because I had a small, damp, insistent reason on my chest making sounds that had already rearranged my soul. I followed her voice the way a ship follows the line between black sea and blacker sky. The floor came back into focus. The ceiling remembered its corners. The bleeding slowed from river to stream to the stubborn seep of a cut that has decided to heal on its own time. "Better," Dr. Rowan said at last, and the words sat me more squarely back in my body. "You've been brave," she added, and because she did not say strong, I loved her for it. Brave can cry. Brave can ask for the hand again, even after it lets go. We slept in a scatter, Sarah in the chair with her head at an impossible angle, Dr. Rowan on a folded blanket like a camped-out saint, Brannock on the threshold with his coat over his shoulders and his hand on the latch. I woke once and found him looking, not at me, not at Leora, but at the painted spiral above the door. His mouth moved. He was not praying. He was making a promise to a shape. Dawn came the way honest things come, pale and undeniable. Mist lifted off the fields as if the earth were exhaling. The village woke cautiously, like a person with a bruise. The posy of heather at my windowsill had dried into a softer purple, its red thread dulled with night air. Leora opened her eyes and looked at me with a seriousness that made me laugh. "Yes," I told her, "we did it." Word moves through a place in ways the post never learns. By mid-morning, I heard steps in the lane, then the hush of a crowd trying to hush itself and failing. Brannock opened the door half an inch, and then wide. The green had come to my threshold. The baker and the butcher and the boys with chalk and the women with thread, and the men whose hands remembered knots better than signatures. Hale stood too, which I decided to take as a beginning rather than an affront. Pike was not there. Dr. Rowan remained, not at my side now, but not far either. Sarah retied her braid as if braids are what women do when ceremony sneaks up on them. "I'll ask," Brannock said softly for me alone. "We can keep them out, if you wish." "Let them in. Not into the room, into the seeing." I sat up, arranged the blanket, checked that Leora was content at my breast, and nodded. Brannock stepped aside. The village did what humans do when they want to be respectful, and end up being curious. They came as close as they dared and pretended to fix their shawls. "This is Leora," I said. "I did not stand. Queens do not always stand. She is not chosen above. She is chosen among." The word did not make my mouth taste of crowns. It tasted of tasks. If you must tell a story about her, let it be the one where we decided together to be better than our fear. Brannock lifted his small bowl, the last of the earth pigment, the same color as the lane after rain. He looked at me and I nodded once, and he dipped his little finger and touched the gentlest dot of color to Leora's brow. Barely there, a kiss the color of the hill. Not to mark her for us, to mark us for her. Somewhere in the crowd, Mara cried in the way bakers cry, with their whole shoulders. Mrs. Thorne made a small noise and pretended it was at a stitch. A boy whispered, "Leora," out loud to try the feel of it, and smiled because the name felt like a secret that wasn't. Hale looked at his shoes and, for once, found nothing to stand on but earth. Dr. Rowan cleared her throat in that crisp way of theirs and said, "I'll need to record that mother and child are well." She took a polite step toward the door, and then stopped because steps are not always needed when a new thing stands up on its own. And I'll need to speak with the county about the difference between concern and interference. Her mouth twitched. "If any of you wish to write to them, there are forms." "Or stories," Brannock said. "Stories shape law slower than letters, but deeper." He turned to me. "What do you need?" I took stock. Not of the list I had made, salt thread towels, but of the odd, exact catalog of a morning after a life begins. Water, heat, Someone to hold the door while I slept, someone to stand at the lane with a sensible sort of pride, someone to put the kettle on, someone to tell the new name to the old stones so they would learn how to sound it when the wind passed. Time, I said, and bread, and a way to pay back what was kept from being taken. You'll pay it by staying, Mara said, startling herself and then nodding as if agreeing with someone she trusted, by letting us carry the next heavy thing before it's a crisis. By telling us when we hurt you without meaning to, Mrs. Thorne added, with an honesty so plain that it made me love her. And sometimes when we mean to. Brannock drew his shoulders up as if a weight had finally arranged itself properly there. We'll meet at the hall when it's dried. We'll rebuild the bit that burned. We'll talk about orders and midwives and doors you may not cross unless you've been invited. We'll make some of it into paper, since paper seems to reassure men with horns. His mouth tilted at the memory of Pike. The rest we'll make into habit. The village drifted away in twos and threes, reluctant to drop the new shape we had made, relieved to learn shapes can be carried in the hand and not just in the crowd. Hale remained just long enough to clear his throat and mutter something about minutes and resolutions. Sarah wrote her notes with a stub of pencil and then put the pencil down like a weapon laid to rest. Dr. Rowan took the kettle off the boil at just the right moment and left it by the hearth as if she meant to return later for tea and gossip and a scolding for whoever had let the junction box go that long without a proper inspection.
Rest, Sarah said. There will be time enough for the next thing. I slept then, with the exhaustion of someone who has crossed her own border. In the kind dreams that follow fear, I saw Leora standing on the green at dusk years from now, hair a tangle, knees dirty, the spiral above the latch painted bright again, the bowl in Brannock's hand passed to her to hold for a minute while he tied a shoelace for a child. I woke to the smaller, truer thing, the weight of her on my chest, and the quiet breathing of people who had chosen to stay. When Pike returned that afternoon, he came without the horn. He took off his hat at my door. He did not look at the paint above the latch. He looked at my daughter and then at the space just left of my head. "We'll be in touch," he said, but without threat. "There will be reviews." He cleared his throat. "If anyone asks, tell them I saw what I saw. Healthy." It cost him something to say it. I watched him pay and did not give him change. Cale did not come back. Word ran ahead of him that the engine crew had found tool marks on the junction box, that a boy had described a coat that matched, that men who once opened their hands to him now kept them at their sides. I did not smile. Exile is not a joke, even when it is deserved. I fed my daughter and watched the light move across the table like a blessing that remembered to show up hourly. Toward evening, the sky cleared the way a face clears after tears. The village gathered itself again without being called. Not a crowd this time, a procession without announcements. Mara with a covered plate, Mrs. Thorne with a shawl her mother had knit when wool still cost hours more than money, Finn with his hands clean and his chin high, Dr. Rowan with a book she meant to forget on purpose, Sarah with nothing in her hands for once. Brannock came last, and not because he wanted the entrance, because someone had to make sure no one was left behind. "Will you step to the threshold?" he asked me softly, and I did. Leora wrapped and warm, her mouth making small professions against my collarbone. The village stood back enough for air and forward enough for warmth. Brannock lifted his palm, clean now of paint, and said what needed saying at last. "Welcome, Leora. The light you bring is yours. We undertake to make this a place where it does not have to defend itself to exist." He glanced at me, as if to ask whether he had said it right. "You did," I said, "and when you forget, we'll remind you." They laughed, the sound that makes walls strong from the inside. Someone began a song without words. Someone else harmonized, because harmony is what happens when you expect it of yourself. Leora slept through her first ceremony because wise queens do. I stood on my own threshold and did not feel owned by it. Later, when the last of the plates had been taken and the last of the well-wishing had resolved into the soft noise of a town remembering its supper, Brannock lingered. He did not sit. He put his hand an inch from the spiral above the latch, the way a man warms his palms over a flame he has built. "They called you chosen," he said. "I meant it as a task, not a title. If we fail the task, you take it from us." "I will," I said, "and I will ask for help before it gets that far." He smiled at that, at the audacity of a woman promising to be both sovereign and citizen, and stepped backward into the lane with the care of a man leaving a church and not wanting to show his back to the altar. "Good night, Elira." "Good night, Chief." I tried the word on him the way a girl tries on her mother's ring. It fit so well he didn't need to comment. I shut the door. I did not lock it. The spiral was enough. I lay down with my daughter, both of us smelling of milk and clay and thunder's clean aftertaste. The house made the small night noises that say a place is keeping itself. The last thing I saw before sleep was the blue smear of paint on my fingertip where I had touched Leora's brow to make the dot firm. I did not wipe it away. In the morning, because there is always a morning, I will take Leora to the green. I will buy bread and pay for it with coins and stories. I will send a letter to whatever office houses Pike's form, and I will send another to a woman I once was when I thought storms only came from the sky. I will make a list that says nothing about fear. I will teach my daughter to read the weather the way my mother taught me, not just the clouds, but the faces. They said I would birth a monster. The only monstrous thing left in this village is the way we once let fear speak louder than love. We have muzzled it for now. We will take turns holding the leash. And when the next mother walks the square with a belly that frightens someone who loves his paper, we will not wait for a chief. We will make a circle around her and paint what needs painting and say what needs saying and stand where we are required. We will do it because we have chosen to be the kind who do.